very much for your cooperation. ご来場の皆様にお知らせいたします。本日は多数の申し込みをいただいており、会場内は満席となり、立ち見が出ることが予想されます。着席いただく際は、空席にできないよう、前方や内側から詰めてお座りいただくとともに、荷物などは足元やに置き、座席に置かないようご協力よろしくお願いします。Also, the use of flash photography or changing places to take photographs is strictly prohibited unless it is by authorized personnel. Please do 提していますので、今しばらくお待ちくださいますようお願いします。また、本会場内での飲食につきましては、すべて禁止されておりますので、ご注意願います。携帯電話をお持ちの方は、電源をお切りになるか、マナーモードに設定の上、通話、撮影など音の出る行為はご遠慮願います。また、フラッシュを利用した撮影や席を移動していたします。まもなく講演会を開会いたします。開会挨拶後、アン・サン・スー・チー氏が入場されますので、入場の際は盛大な拍手にてお迎えください。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Haneda Masashi. Vice President of the University of Tokyo in charge of international affairs. And I will serve as your host in today's event. It is a great honor and pleasure for us, for all of us, that Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, chairperson of the National League for Democracy, the Republic of the Union of Myanmar, has visited our university to give this lecture, today's lecture. I would like to also thank all the audience who are present here with us today. Before we move on to the lecture, President Hamada Junichi of the University of Tokyo will briefly introduce today's guest speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, onto the stage. Please give a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Junichi Hamada, President of this university. Today is a very special day. Why? It's because Daw Aung San Suu Kyi can come here to a university. This is the first time. And also because today is Myanmar's Happy New Year. Is that right? Yes. This is a very great day today. So I'd now like to briefly introduce our guest speaker to you. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi studied philosophy, politics, and economics at St. Hugh's College, Oxford, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1967. Between 1985 and 86, she was a researcher at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies of Kyoto University. Following her return to Myanmar in 1988, she helped found the National League for Democracy and lead the pro-democracy movement. As you all know, she received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi became the chairperson of the National League for Democracy of January last year. And in April of the same year, she was elected to Parliament. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask her to give us a lecture. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your university and for giving me the chance to speak to you, especially about young people. I understand that Tokyo University is one of the best in the world and that some of the students here are some of the very best in the world. So it's a great privilege for me to speak to you on the topic that was chosen for me by the university, democracy expectations of young leaders of the world. That's democracy, you see. Sometimes you give, sometimes you take. So sometimes you do what you're told to do, and sometimes you tell people what they should do. So it's on an equal basis. That's the beginning of democracy. It has to be give and take. Those who do not believe in give and take cannot really practice democracy. So this is what young people have to learn from the very beginning. That the title is Democracy Expectations of Young Leaders of the World. I have to confess that I'm always a little uneasy when the word leader is used in my country these days, because there's too much emphasis on leadership. There's too much emphasis on what it takes to be a leader and not what it takes to be a good follower. And that also is important. I do not think that somebody who is not a good follower can ever be a good leader. Because if you're not a good follower, you do not understand the problems of those who have to follow the lead of somebody in front of them. And if you cannot learn this, you cannot know how to be compassionate and understanding towards those whom you have to lead. So I think young people have to start by questioning whether or not they are good followers before they decide whether or not they're going to be good leaders. So in my country today, we have a problem. This problem is very simple and at the same time very difficult. For about 50 years, our education system was neglected. The aim of the military regime that ruled our country for many decades was to make sure that the people were quiescent and obedient. They were not concerned about making the people think for themselves. In fact, they wanted not good followers, but obedient followers. There's a difference between goodness and obedience. But because of these long years during which our education system was aimed at producing a quiescent public, our young people lost their notions of what leadership meant. And when we started the transition to democracy about, well, roughly 3 years ago, we should say that. We could say about 3 years ago, when elections were held in 2010 to replace the military regime with a civilian elected government. Now, I must say, in the interest of truth and in the interest of what is needed in democracy, that those elections were not truly satisfactory. I do not think that anybody who is objective could say that those elections were truly free or fair. But whatever the case may be, that was the transition from military to civilian government. And from then on, there was a lot of talk in my party. To begin with, we didn't contest the elections of 2010 because we did not think that the rules and regulations with regard to the elections were free or fair. For one thing, the regulations required that, first of all, political parties had to register legally in order to be able to contest the elections. And in order to register, we had to undertake to expel all those of our members who were in prison. Now, as it happened in 2010, our best and most energetic workers were still in prison, and I was under house arrest. And to make sure that I would be placed under the category of those who had to be expelled, they made it quite clear that even under house arrest, I counted as a prisoner. So I would have had to be expelled from my party as well. So my party decided that they would not register and they would not contest the elections, because to register a party at the expense of tremendous disloyalty to our most loyal members would have been against all the principles in which we believe. So we did not contest the elections. But nevertheless, after the elections and after some of the forces for democracy, the organizations for democracy, decided to register as legal political parties, questions were asked about the leadership of my party, the NLD. And there was a loud cry for younger leaders to be brought in. And young people started talking about getting influential positions, meaningful positions in the party. When I was released in 2010, after the elections, a few weeks after the elections I was released, I made it quite clear that one should not think in terms of position, but in terms of responsibility. I said that I was not interested in giving particular positions to anybody, young or old. I would think of it as giving people a responsibility within the party, giving them a chance to take up certain responsibilities. And this is how I would like aspiring young leaders to look upon their task in life, that they have to assume responsibilities. It is not a question of gaining influence or gaining a position or becoming a leader. It is about assuming responsibility. Once you have decided to assume a responsibility, you must keep with it. You have to keep with it. Very often, my colleagues and I have asked how it was that we were able to carry on throughout decades of oppression. Why is it that we decided not to leave our chosen path and to take up an easier life? And for me, the answer was very simple, because for me, it was not possible to give up a responsibility that I had assumed out of my own free will. And in this context, I would like to talk about the word sacrifice. People talk a lot about the word sacrifice. I find it personally rather embarrassing when people talk about the sacrifices I've made, because I do not think that I've made any sacrifices. I chose the path I wanted to follow, and I walked that path out of my own free will. There was no sacrifice involved as far as I am concerned. And I think it is very disturbing when people follow a path they have chosen and then talk about the sacrifices they have made. And I would like to ask, what sacrifices? You chose to do this. You chose it because you wanted to do this, because you believed in it. If you think it is a sacrifice, it is as though you didn't believe in what you were doing. It is as though you were forced to give up something because other people have made you do it, or that you are giving up something for other people. But in fact, if you follow a path of your own choice, you are not giving up anything for anybody else. You are fulfilling your own destiny out of your own free will. And I think this should be at the basis of any position of responsibility, that the responsibilities you assume out of your own free will. And because of that, you do not have the right to demand anything in return, not even gratitude, because nobody asked you to, nobody forced you to. If you do something because you're forced to, then also you're not entitled to gratitude, because you're not doing it willingly. In the old days, the Greeks, in the days when the Greeks made live sacrifices, made animal sacrifices to the gods, they would make sacrifices for a particular boon to be granted. They always said that for that boon to be granted, for that sacrifice to be successful, the animal sacrifice must be willing. That is to say, and in those days, of course, that was the usual practice, but in spite of the great contributions that the Greeks made to world civilization, you can't say that it was a very civilized practice, sacrificing live animals. But still, behind that somewhat, I would have thought, savage practice, was this tremendous understanding of the meaning of sacrifice. They said that unless the sacrifice animal was willing, their boon would not be granted. So sacrifice is something that you make out of your own free will, and you do not have the right to demand anything in return. When our young people think of the future and of what they are contributing towards democracy, I think quite often they think more about the rights to which they are entitled. And this is something I have had to speak about very often to our young people. Yes, democracy grants you rights, but it also demands that you discharge your duties as a member of a democratic society, or as a member of a group that believes in the principles of democracy. Unless you are willing to discharge your responsibilities, you do not have the right to demand your rights. They are no longer your rights, because you have not discharged your part of the contract. Life is a contract. I do not think anything comes free in this life, and this is what I always tell our young people. Never think that anything comes free. You have to pay for everything in some form or the other. You may have to pay for it nicely in the form of kindness, in the form of love, in the form of compassion, in the form of friendship. Or you may have to pay for it in a tougher way, in the form of suffering. But whatever it is, you pay for everything in this life. And I think this is something that you should accept, not with despair, but with pride, that we do not take anything free. We are not freeloaders. We do not want anything free. We are prepared to pay for the position that we achieve in this world. We are prepared to pay for the fact that we are born into this world of human beings, and that we have to, in this world where we have to learn to get on with other human beings. And that is one of the first prices we have to pay if we wish to be a member of society, any society. We must pay in the sense that we must think of the aspirations, the hopes and fears, the needs of other members of the society. You have to give something of yourself. You cannot claim that you have the right to the best position in the society to which you are born, and that everything must be given to you. No, you have to give too. So this is the basis on which I would like our young people in Burma to approach the question of democracy. A very simple democratic duty, responsibility, which I understand the young people of Japan are not exercising as much as they should, is that of voting in elections. Now, let me tell you one thing. I will be 68 in June, but I have never yet voted in a free and fair election in my life. I've never had this opportunity because by the time I was old enough to vote, Burma was under military dictatorship, and there were no free and fair elections in which I could vote. And the last two elections that were held, the one in 1990, I was able to cast a vote, but under house arrest. So I was not able to freely cast a vote. I asked to vote, and because the law, as it was then, allowed me to cast a vote in spite of the fact that I was under house arrest, they made arrangements for me to cast an advance vote in my house under supervision. And in the 2010 elections, again I was granted this right, if you liked, to vote. But because my party had boycotted the elections, I refused to vote. So, if you consider the fact that in all my life I've never been able to vote in a free and fair election, you must understand how precious your right is. That you have the right regularly, every time there's an election, to cast your vote freely for the person or for the party whom you support. And this is a duty that you must discharge conscientiously. When you think of all the people in the world, not just in Burma, but in many other places, who do not have this right, you will realize how precious it is, how valuable it is. When I was living in England, I noticed that among my English friends too, there was this indifference towards voting because we were taking their democratic rights for granted. It disturbed me very much, and I would always persuade them, try to persuade them to go out to vote. I said, what does it take you? It's just at the most an hour or two on one day in several years to go to the polling station and to vote for somebody or some party who you believe will be better for your country than the alternatives. What does it cost you? Why don't you go to vote? And some of my friends would say to me, I don't know for whom to vote. So I would say, well, all right, I'll study the candidates and I tell you for whom. But then go out and vote. Don't waste that vote. Because, of course, I didn't have the vote. I was not a citizen of the United Kingdom, so I was not allowed to vote. But I wanted those who had the right to vote to use it. And I would like to urge the young people of Japan to do the same. Please don't be indifferent to the elections because they come so regularly. There are many countries in the world where we have to fight for decades for an election to take place. And yet an election is only the beginning of democracy. It is certainly not the end, or even not an assurance of democracy. Because an election can be far from perfect. The elections in Burma, that were held in Burma in 2010, were described by the United Nations. And I must remind you that the United Nations is extremely conventional and courteous and cautious, and generally do not like to criticize any member of their organization. But even the United Nations officially said that those elections were deeply flawed. And it was through these deeply flawed elections that the present democratic government in Burma has been established. Now my assistant is holding up her hand to say that if I wish to give more time to questions from the audience, I must stop in 5 minutes. So let's take a democratic vote. I think, do you want more time for your questions and answers? I think that would be more interesting than me giving a long lecture. Don't you think so? Yes. So I'll finish in 5 minutes, but after the 5 minutes, what I would like to do is to answer the questions that I was not able to answer at Kyoto University because my lecture went on a little too long and I didn't leave enough time for the students to put all the questions they wanted to put to me. So I'll start winding up my lecture, and in 5 minutes it would have ended, and I will read the questions that the students of Kyoto had put up to me, but which I was not able to answer for lack of time. And after I've answered it's a debt I owe. I'm always scared of being in debt. I dislike debt, so I like to repay my debts as quickly as possible. So after I've paid my debts to the students of Kyoto University, and I hope somehow they'll get to hear about it, then I'll open the floor to the present audience. So, to wind it up, it's very simple. The answer is some way very simple. Democracy expectations of the youth of this world. You have the right to your expectations, but you must accept your responsibilities as well. I think many of you will have heard of the famous remark that was made by John F. Kennedy many years ago at his inauguration as President of the United States. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. This is a very simple statement, but the reason why it became very famous is because it strikes at the heart of all democratic societies. You must not ask what you can get. You've got to start by asking what you can give. And what you can give will decide in many ways what you are able to get in return. It is the same in any democratic society. And I say the same to the young people of my country who are very poor. Our young people who have never enjoyed democratic rights, because all those under 50 have never enjoyed democratic rights. The first military regime was established in 1962. So that means that for 50 years we're no longer under a military regime, but I cannot say as yet that we are a perfect practicing democracy. So all our young people, because young people I think are internationally accepted as those under 30. So all the young people of Burma are in a position where they do not know what democratic rights are, what democratic practices are. But I would like them to start in the right way by thinking of their responsibilities, thinking of what they can give before they start thinking of what they can get. Now, that is the end of my lecture, and now I go on to the questions which I was not able to answer at Kyoto University. I answered the first two. Now, the third one was, some people worry that you're accommodating towards the military these days. What relationship do you want to build with the military on political issues such as amendment of the Constitution? Well, when I'm asked questions like that, I'm a little surprised, because when we started out on the movement for democracy in 1988, we started by saying that we wished for national reconciliation, that we wished for a situation where the military government and the civilian population could go back to the old days when we respect and loved our military, when we looked upon our soldiers as our defenders, and the soldiers also looked upon the people as their family, as those who would nurture them and those who would help them in the discharge of their duties. So from the very beginning, I've always said that I'm not out to attack the military or to do the military down, but to make sure that we establish a society where the military and the civilian population are two faces of the same coin, all working towards the security and freedom of our country. And because I am now on better terms with the military than I used to be. People are critical, and I find this very, very surprising, because I've never made a secret of the fact that this is our goal, to establish a better relationship with the military. And if people think I'm achieving that, I'm very happy about it. And it says, what relations do you want to build with the military on political issues such as amendment of the Constitution? The important parts of the Constitution can only be amended by more than 75% of the votes in our legislature. Now, since 25% of the seats are taken by the military, and they are not contested seats, these military representatives are nominated by the Commander-in-Chief. Since 25% of our representatives are from the military, it means that for us to be able to change the important parts of the Constitution, not only would all the civilian representatives be united and determined to change, we would need at least one brave soldier who would stand up and say, I'm going to vote for civilians. So what I want to do is to change the Constitution in agreement with the military, because they also agree that such changes are necessary for the well-being of our country. I do not believe in violence, and I do not think that you can change people's minds through violence. You may get them to do what you want, because you can frighten them, you can intimidate them, you can pressure them, but you cannot change their minds that way. And I want change in our country to be based on a change of mind, rather than of quiescence to forces that they cannot resist. Now the next question was, thank you for your special lecture today. Well, that was cute. It was a very precious time for my life. I'm studying about crops, especially about rice in my laboratory, and interested in the population of young people who are engaged in agriculture in Myanmar. These days, foreign investment has been remarkably increasing, and more young people in Myanmar are working in industrial plants and so on. So how do you feel about this situation, and what do you expect from young people? What do you think is the key to protect industries in Myanmar? I was very pleased with this question because I'm concerned about the future of agriculture in my country. We are a predominantly agriculture society. That is to say, more than 60% of our population are agricultural workers. They live off the land. They are engaged in the agricultural economy. But the state of agriculture in Burma is deplorable these days. Our rural population are very poor, and many of our farmers and peasants have become landless. I won't go into the details of why they have become landless, because that's a very long and complicated issue. But I would like to revive the agricultural economy in our country, but in a new way. I keep saying what I want is a 21st century approach to the agriculture economy. Food security is going to be a big concern for the future of our globe. And food means, of course, agriculture. And I always try to make the point that you can't live without food. You may be able to live without television, with great difficulty perhaps, but you can't live without food. Similarly, you may be able to live even without the internet, but not without food. So we must take advantage of the fact that food security is going to be a major issue for the 21st and future centuries, to revive the agricultural economy of our country in such a way that those who work to produce food can be affluent as well. It's a great pity that in many parts of the world, those who work to produce what is most essential for us, food, are the poorest. The food producers are paid so much worse than fashion designers, for example. Mind you, I have great admiration for fashion designers, but still, I do not think that there is something quite right about such a situation. And I think we need research to find out what kind of crops we can grow in Burma now to make us competitive, because we've been left behind in the race. The the other Southeast Asian countries, which became affluent over the last decade, their way, if we are to imitate them, I doubt that we'll be able to catch up with them or overtake them. So we have to be more innovative. We have to be more adventurous. And for that, we need research. We need research on the kind of crops that we could grow that would be marketable and that would make our agriculture community affluent. I especially want to promote small and medium agricultural enterprises. So any young Japanese people interested in helping Burma should take a lot of interest in agricultural research and marketing facilities and try to help us in that way. Foreign investment, it says, is increasing remarkably. Actually, it's increasing more in theory than in actual fact, because many of the big businesses are waiting to see what our foreign investment laws are going to be like, and studying the state of infrastructure in Burma, which is very poor. That is to say, the basics, such as water, all-weather roads, electricity, we are lacking in these very, very basic facilities. And many potential investors hesitate to invest because of these problems. So there are many things that have to be done before real investment will come. But I think few big businesses would be interested in investing in small and medium agricultural enterprises. And for that, I would like to look to young people in Japan and all over the world with creative ideas to see what they can do to help. I understand that it is a biophysiological fact, if you like, that the most creative period of a person's life ceases at 25. So please start thinking all those under 25. And the last question was, what does Myanmar want Japan to do most? Japan's support is for a democratic government of the people, by the people, for the people. Well, this is exactly it. We have to make sure that what Japan is supporting is the people rather than the government. That is what democracy means. Genuine support for democracy means support for the people, not for the government. Because if it is a practicing democracy, governments come and governments go, but the people go on forever. So what I would like Japan to do is to concentrate on helping the people of Burma rather than the government of Burma, and to make sure that whatever government there is in Burma, it is working for the people, that it is government by the people, for the people. Thank you.
For your clear, inspiring, and impressive lecture. And thank you also for answering to questions of students of Kyoto University.
Yes, please note Kyoto University.
I'm sure that our students, the students of this university, have a lot of questions. Because of the lack of time, we have already designated some students who want to speak, ask a direct question to our San Suu Kyi. So let's proceed to the session of question and answer. Let's start.
မေဆိုမင်္ဂလာရှိတဲ့နေ့ဒီကိုဖြစ်ပါစေလို့ဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်နာမည်ကတော့မျိုးမြင့်စင်ပါလွန်ခဲ့တဲ့22နှစ်ကမြန်မာပြည်ကနေပြီးတော့ဂျပန်နိုင်ငံရောက်ရှိနေတဲ့ refugee ကျောင်းသားတယောက်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်အခုဒီ3လပိုင်း25ရက်နေ့ကဂျပန်Tokyo University မှာရှိတဲ့ Human Security Program ကနေပြီးတော့မဟာဝိဇ္ဇာပညာကျွန်တော်ရဲ့မွေးရစာကြီးကကွန်မှုမျိုးပါမေစုကိုကျွန်တော်မေကွန်းတစ်ခုမေးချင်ပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ဒီနေ့မေးတဲ့မေကွန်းကမေစုအခုဟောပြောသွားတဲ့ဒီခေါင်းစဉ်တွေတော့နည်းနည်းတွဲနေကျွန်တော်မေးချင်တဲ့မေကွန်းကတော့ဂျပန်နိုင်ငံကမြန်မာနိုင်ငံကိုစီးပွားရေးပိတ်ဆို့မှုမလုပ်ခဲ့ပဲနဲ့ဒီတော့ဟိုဒီထောက်ပံ့မှုတွေလုပ်ခဲ့ပါနောက်ပိုင်းမှာဂျပန်နိုင်ငံကNGO NPO တွေကနေပြီးတော့ဒီ grassroots level ကနေပြီးတော့ဗမာပြည်တွင်းထဲမှာပြုနေတောင်းလဲတာသူတို့လုပ်ခဲ့ပါ တယ်လုပ်ခဲ့တာနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့အမေစုအနေနဲ့ဘယ်လို evaluation လုပ်နေလဲဆိုတော့သိချင်ပါတယ်နောက်တစ်ခုက2015ထွေထွေကောက်ပွဲပြီးတဲ့နောက်မှာ NLD ကဆိုရဖြစ်လာတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာဂျပန်နိုင်ငံကိုဘယ်လိုဆက်ဆံသွားမလဲဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်သိချင်ပါတယ်။ဘာဖြစ်လို့လဲဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်အတီးတွေကပေါ့နော်အမေစုဟိုင်ယူသွားပြီးတော့ကိုရီးယားကိုဂျပန်ကိုကြော်သွားတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်ဂျပန်ကိုသိပြီးလေးမထားဘူးလားဆိုပြီးတော့သူတို့ကမြင်နေကြတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်ကျွန်တော်သိပြီးပို့ပေးတာ။ခုမေးခွန်းနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးကျွန်တော်ပြန်ပြီးတော့ဂျပန်လိုပါတာ။
ကျမပဲဟိုအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပဲခါတယ်
ဟုတ်ကဲ့
ခါပြတာပြန်လို့ရှိရင်ချင်းပုံ
ဟုတ်ကဲ့
အဲ့တော့ this young man has been in Japan for more than 20 years, and that's quite obvious because he speaks Burmese like a Japanese. He also happens to come from my constituency, which is Komo. And I'm very pleased to meet a member of my constituency, and through him to give my New Year's greeting to all the people of my constituency. He had a couple of questions for me. One is that Japan did not impose sanctions on Burma, and there were many NGOs and other Japanese organizations engaged with Burma over the last decades of military rule, and how I assess the results of such engagement. And the second question is about 2015, that should we take over the government after the 2015 elections, what will our relationship with Japan be like? And he mentioned the fact that some people in Japan were disturbed because when I went to Hawaii, I visited South Korea on the way back, and I bypassed Japan. Now, I'm very glad to be able to answer this question because I think there are many misunderstandings about that. But let me start with the first one. It is true that Japan did not impose economic sanctions on Burma over the last 5 years, during which the State Law and Order Restoration Council and its successor were in power in our country. And Japanese organizations and the Japanese government continue to give help to the country. Now, let me say that I believe that the sanctions imposed by the Western countries did help us to achieve democracy rather more speedily than we might otherwise have done. But that does not mean that we reject the help that was given to us by those countries that did not impose sanctions on Burma. The important thing was that whatever help was given to the country should have been given in such a way that it was the people who benefited from that help, rather than strengthening the regime. Now, this is a fine balance that any country that is helping another country where the government is not wholly supported by the population is a problem. This is something of which they have to be very aware. And for us to assess what the results of Japanese engagement over the last 25 years has been, we will need more time, because often the results are not obvious immediately. It takes time before we can assess what has been achieved through engagement with the military regime. To be quite frank, I would say that I'm sure it had both negative and positive results. The question is which weighed more, and that I think it is too early for us to assess. Now, the second question is perhaps in some ways related to the first. Perhaps there are people who believe that because Japan did not impose sanctions on the military regime, that the National League for Democracy might not look upon Japan as a good friend. This is not so. Friends come in different shapes and sizes, and different colors, and with different attitudes. And friendship can be based on differences as much as on similarities. Because think of how boring the world would be if everybody else thought in exactly the same way as you do. You might as well live alone. So I'm not troubled by the fact that the Japanese government did not always think in the same way as we did. And I have no doubt whatsoever that an NLD government would be able to establish the best kind of relationship possible with the Japanese government, perhaps even better than now. And as for the reason why I did not stop in Japan, this was because my reason for going to South Korea was to support the Special Olympics for the mentally handicapped. and which was taking place at that time. And I also had an engagement in Hawaii, so it was just logistically, it was just simpler to take in South Korea then than to come to Japan. But I have always intended to come to Japan because of the time I spent in Kyoto University many years ago, and because the people of Japan have always been very supportive. Even in the days when the NLD felt that the government of Japan was not quite as supportive of our movement as we might have wished it to be, I never doubted the warmth and enthusiasm with which the people of Japan supported our aspirations and our activities. And I'm very happy to be able to thank you for everything that your people did over the years, and to have this opportunity to come to Japan to say how much we appreciate the tremendous friendship shown to us by the ordinary people of Japan. And when I was in Kyoto, and also, of course, now that I'm in Tokyo, I'm very touched and honored by the fact that so many people, ordinary people, are so warm towards me. There were times in Kyoto when I felt I was back in Burma, because the people there were as warm and as supportive as my own people. So I would like to say thank you, and please carry on with your questions.
Next student.
Good morning, Mr. Vicky. Thank you for your lecture. I am Li Hao, and I came to Japan from China when I lived in Hiroshima, and I was in elementary school. So, and now I'm a doctoral student and minoring in contemporary Chinese politics. I also think that democracy is necessary to China, my mother country. And I would like to ask about Burma-China relationship. Today, China has built a good relationship with current government in Burma. And some people criticize that China will protect the old regime and will be an obstacle reform. So there is no doubt that China is a very, very important neighbor for Burma. So what do you think about China's role for Burma's reform, and what do you expect China to do for Burma's reform? Thank you.
First of all, let me say that I'm very happy to meet you, because the very first foreign country I visited for the first time in 24 years last year was Thailand. And like in Japan, I was amazed and touched by how very warm and supportive the people, the ordinary people of Thailand were when I went there. And of course, I have to confess that I always think that the people are more important than any government. The Thai government was also very good to me, but it was the spontaneous support of the people of Thailand that I valued so much. With regard to China, yes, China is a great power. It's not only a great power, it's one of our closest neighbors. We are between India and China, which makes us, of course, geopolitically very, very important, if we want to put it that way. There are those who worry that because China is a communist government, and we are aiming at establishing a truly democratic society, relations between our two countries could be strained, and that the Chinese might not be wholly supportive of what we're trying to achieve. But that does not worry me unduly. I keep reminding people that when the first communist government was established in China many years ago, in the early 1950s, Burma was then a practicing democracy with excellent relations established with the United Nations and the United States and other Western countries, and also with India. But even then, Burma was one of the very first countries in the world to officially recognize the communist government of China. And we continue to have good relations with China over all the years when Burma was a practicing democracy. At the same time, we continue to maintain good relations with the West and with India and with other countries around the world. So it's not a matter of either or. I think we should all be mature enough to accommodate different views and different aspirations without losing our friendship for one another. So it does not worry me. It is possible that there are some in China who might think that a truly democratic government in Burma would strain relations between our two countries. But I'm quite confident that this is not what will happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a truly inspiring lecture. I am a Japanese student, and the Japanese government has continuously shown its commitment towards supporting the democratization of Burma as long as it is genuine. But looking back at the past history, it can be observed that the military regime has repeatedly broken its words and chosen to revert back to a non-democratic stance. And you also mentioned in your lecture that the elections of 2010 was deeply flawed. So given these past experiences, do you believe that the current democratization is in fact genuine? And if so, how do you think it's different from the past movements?
I think whether it's genuine or not depends very much on all of us. That is to say, first of all, on the people of Burma, and then on the international community which supports our aspirations. I don't think we can take anything for granted. As I said earlier, you get nothing free. You have to work for it. I always say that I don't believe in hope without endeavor. You don't hope for things, you work for them. And it is working towards your goal that can truly keep your hopes alive and enable you to realize them. There are certain differences between, well, when you really think of it, I don't think there ever was a time in the last 25 years when the military regime made any move towards genuine democratization, apart from the elections that were held in 1990. And once the NLD won the elections, they demonstrated quickly enough that they had no intention of giving power over to the elected government. So that was one occasion when perhaps the international community might have imagined that Burma was going to go towards go in for democratization. Now, in 2010, when the elections were held, there were many, many countries in the world which wanted to believe that Burma was now firmly on the path to democratization. Now, I think I would like to say that we have started out on the path to democratization, but that it is too early to say we are firmly on the path. But we have to make sure that we are firmly on the path. There are many people who ask me whether the process of democratization in Burma is irreversible. Now, I always say very simply, it will be irreversible once the military has accepted it. We have to say this because of the constitution, which gives the military a very special role in the politics of Burma. And until the military and the civilian population have come to an agreement as to what the role of both should be, I do not think we can say that we are firmly on the path to democracy. But there have been certain steps which we could see as positive and over which we can be optimistic, but not over-optimistic. I've always said that we need to be cautiously optimistic. I'm a member of the legislature, and I'm very proud of the fact that the legislature is certainly working towards democracy and has become a far more democratic institution than I would have expected it to be. We are very few in the legislature. We contested the by-elections. As I explained earlier, we boycotted the elections in 2010. But last year, there were by-elections to fill about 45 seats. We won 43 of these because one seat we couldn't win because our candidate was disqualified. And the second seat we lost because our candidate did not do what I told him to do. which is very simple. I told him to go down to the villages. I said this is important. And I think he was a little too complacent. He thought that just by staying in the town he would be able to win. Well, that is not the case. But in any case, 43 out of 45 is not bad. And then 2 or 3 members from other parties and independents joined us, so we are 45 in the legislature. But that's very few when you consider that our legislature counts over 600. In spite of that, we have been able to achieve much more than we might have expected. Because to begin with, the speakers of both houses are very, very even-handed. They're very fair. They do not give, they do not favor their party, which got over 82% of the seats, and that is not counting the seats of the military. So, of course, we are in a very weak position. In the lower house, we are only 39. But in spite of the fact, we have been able to table motions successfully, which of course, it's very simple to conclude from that we have been supported in some of our motions by the members of the ruling party, by the USDP, because without their support, we could not have managed to get our motions through. And many of our, well, almost all the members of our party are in different committees, and I chair 4 committees. I think I'm probably the only one who chairs 4 committees. And since I'm a member of a minority party, even though, mind you, even with 39, we're the biggest opposition party in Parliament. And we have been treated as the biggest opposition party in spite of our small numbers. So there has been great progress on the legislative front, and there has been increasing transparency with regard to the work that we do. Well, it's difficult not to be transparent in the legislature, but the executive is less than transparent. It is still highly centralized, and as for the judiciary, it's totally dominated by the executive. So it certainly does not meet the norms of a democratic judiciary. So there is much to be done yet. But still, I think we can say that we are making headway.
Thank you very much. Not our time. Your time is now. So,
why is it my time?
Because you
I don't mind more questions. I would quite happily give my time over to the audience.
Thank you very much for your kindness. I'm Edo Suda, and I visited Yangon in 2011 and had an opportunity to meet you at NLD head office.
Yes, our cowshed.
You have emphasized that just goal can be achieved only by just means. As a politician and a leader of democratization, do you have any dilemma whether to give up a just goal or give up just means? If yes, please tell us how you solve it. If no, please tell us, is human rights abuses in Rakhine region and in Meitila your dilemma, and why?
Well, I do not, for me there's no dilemma with regard to just goals and just means, because I do not think just goals can be achieved by unjust means. There are, of course, those who say that the goals justify the means, the ends justify the means. But practically speaking, if the means that you use are contrary to the ends you're trying to achieve, the ends themselves become distorted. And when you reach that goal, you find that it is not what you expected it to be. You have distorted it through the means that you used. Now, you were talking about Rakhine and Meitila. I don't think there is any contradiction between what I said and the situation there. From the very beginning, when problems started in Rakhine, I said that the most important thing was to establish rule of law. Earlier, I was talking about the fact that our judiciary is practically non-existent as a democratic institution. That means that rule of law is extremely weak in our country. Rule of law is not just about the judiciary, it's also about the administration. It's about the government, it's about the police force, it's about the training that we give to our security forces, it's about the kind of values that prevail in society. So we have had no rule of law in Burma over the last 50 years. What we have had is rule of an authoritarian government. And rule of law has been weakened to the point that it became non-existent. We are trying to re-establish it. There were those who were not very pleased because I emphasized the importance of rule of law rather than communal differences, and they wanted me to talk about how to make these communal differences disappear. It is not as easy as all that. I'm not a magician. If I were, I would just say disappear and it would all disappear. Differences take a long time to sort out because such differences come from long years of misunderstanding. But these differences can be reconciled through negotiation, through exchange of ideas. But there can be no negotiation or exchange of ideas if people do not feel secure. If people feel that their lives are in danger, that their property is in danger, it makes them that much less inclined to sit down calmly and talk with those whom they think are endangering them. So we have to establish an atmosphere of security in which people with different opinions can sit down and exchange ideas and think of the things that we have in common. We all have something in common. Well, to begin with, I can see that each of you has a head and I have a head too. At least that we have in common. And we shouldn't think about the differences first. We should think about what we have in common and work towards a common goal. There are no easy answers, either in Rakhine or in Metila or in Kachin or any part of our country. We are not as homogeneous a society as Japan. We are a country made up of diverse ethnic nationalities. But I'm proud of that. And it is something that we can turn into an asset, provided we learn to sort out our differences. And through this learning process, we strengthen our sense of empathy, our sense of compassion, our breadth of vision. So every situation is what you make of it. You can turn defeat into victory if you know how to go about it. Or you can turn a victory into a defeat if you don't know how to go about it. Your question from the beginning, I will end with an answer to that. Means and goals. I've often said to the members of my party, it's not just about winning, it's about how you win. If you are victorious by means that are shameful, that means that are deplorable, then it's no true victory. But even if you are defeated, but if you accept this defeat, if you face this defeat with dignity, and from it you learn to be a better member of society, then that defeat itself can be a victory.
Thank you very much, Lord Aung San Suu Kyi, for your generosity to give us more time for the discussion. Still, you have some debt for university, so you have to come back
I thought I had given ample time. But I do not mind being in debt to Tokyo University. I happily come back to repay it.
Please. is now leading the hall. Please stand up and the center of the large